to our fourth virtual session here. We're going to be talking about water quality today. Enthusiastic Alina, I love it. So we're going to be doing water quality for the next couple of lessons. And we're going to be creating a book, right? It could be a digital book, or you can make a physical book if you'd like. So we're going to go through today sort of what is water quality, why is water quality important, and how do we measure those things. And then next week in the virtual session, we're going to look at some data from water quality, and we're going to start talking about some things that are new issues that are not necessarily being recorded or talked about yet. Because remember, we never figure out stuff is bad until it hurts something, right? So we're going to create a water quality book that describes the different types of tests that we can do for water. Of course, it's not all of the tests possible, but it's some of them. And then we're going to prepare for our first lab by learning about the tests. So this is a straight up review question from last week. Why is the urban water cycle, or the water cycle happening in a city, more likely to cause flooding? So take a second to think about this and type an answer into the chat. Why is the urban water cycle more likely to cause flooding? Michaela has a great guess here, because humans mess with the natural order of the water cycle. That is true, right? I'll give you guys a hint. Concrete, right? Urban areas, cities have a lot of concrete. So Jack is relating his answer to that. Water is not able to go into the ground, so it mainly travels through runoff. Exactly, right? So in the perfect situation, some water goes in the ground, some water goes in surface runoff and goes to rivers, lakes, etc. When we have solid concrete, water can't go in the ground, right? So it's going to have to go elsewhere, which is more likely to cause a flood. So if you don't have any plants, right? This is probably not true of any city. Every city has at least some, natural area in it. Some more than others, right? If you've traveled to a lot of cities, you probably notice these things. But really, the problem is when you have all of that concrete, if you don't have enough plants to help absorb that water, right, it will cause flooding. So Jack is exactly correct here in saying the surface runoff really is why that happens. So if you look at a city like Houston, right, that's a perfect example of this. Houston has some nature, but it also has a ton of concrete, and it's very flat. So it floods really, really easily. Okay. So we're going to be creating a water quality book. So you can do this in many methods. Hold on a second. I have to yell at my dog because he's... Okay, sorry. He has to go to his place because he gets anxious and paces around. All right, so what you're going to do is you can even work on this while we're doing the virtual session if you'd like. I know some of you like to get a bunch of stuff done. So right now, decide in your mind, which one of these things do you want to do? Do you want to make a physical book on paper? Do you want to make a PowerPoint where each slide is a page in your book? Or do you want to do your own template, right? Maybe you create an actual book template or something like that. Whichever one you choose is fine, right? If you have another idea, also fine. If you know of websites that create booklet things, great. What you're going to do is you're going to start by having a cover page. That could be the first title slide if you're doing a PowerPoint. That could be the front of a brochure type thing if you're doing a brochure booklet. That could be the front of a piece of paper if you're doing this on paper. And you're going to put 3 things. It's going to be pretty easy. You're going to put your name, you're going to put the title, which is Water Quality Testing Project, and then you're going to put a picture or pictures that represent water quality. So you may not know which pictures you would want to put yet, right? But right now, what you could be doing is going into your Google Docs as I'm talking and creating a PowerPoint or Google Doc where you're going to write this information down so that you can easily finish this. So this is posted, right? In fact, it becomes available at 1:30 for you to see. So you don't have to worry about writing every single detail down. This will be posted so that you can refer to it as much as you need to. On the second slide or the second page or a part of your brochure booklet thing, you're going to have a table of contents, right? What does a table of contents do? Any ideas? I mean, look at what this one says. What is a table of contents? Yeah, it tells you what's in a book, right? So we're not going to have a ton of pages in our book. It's going to be pretty short, 7 pages. You might have less. Make this reflect actually what you do, right? So I put here page suggestions for how long I think these pieces of information should be. However, maybe your dissolved oxygen all fits on 1 page, right? That's fine. So make sure that your table of contents actually reflects what page you end up putting stuff on in your book. So update it at the end, I would say. But these are the tests that we're going to be learning about. Dissolved oxygen, phosphates and nitrates, pH, fecal coliform. Then you're going to have data. So you're going to have a data table page and then a conclusion page. So dissolved oxygen is the first water quality factor that we're going to talk about. It's very, very important, right? You may have known already, you may have not, that oxygen dissolves in water, right? Where does that oxygen come from, do you think? Plants, great answer, right? There's plants in water, they produce oxygen. Also, to some extent, the oxygen in the air some of that will dissolve in the water just from interacting, just from the water touching air. Some oxygen gets in that way, right? But really, plants are the main source, right? So think about seaweed, algae, which isn't a plant, but still, any other corally plant things that you see that are producing oxygen, right? They are huge contributors to this. Now, the other important thing about this is many factors can influence it, which we'll talk about. But how do we test it and measure it, right? Well, we test it using a test kit, right? Ooh, fancy answer there. There's 2 kinds. We at MIWA use a tablet that you can dissolve in your sample of water and shake it up, and then it tells you how much oxygen's there. They have a fancier test kit that's more like advanced chemistry, where you do titration and you do acids and bases and all this different stuff to find out an even more precise amount, right? If we were doing this test to, prove that a body of water was safe for something, we would probably use a more advanced kit than what I'm going to show you guys. And the other important piece of information here is our unit. This is measured in parts per million. That means if we take 1 million parts, 1 part or however many parts would be made up of oxygen. So this is a video showing sort of like the complicated testing. Oops. In fact, I'm going to play it, but I'm going to mute it, maybe. Does it even have sound? Maybe it doesn't have sound. So I just wanted you guys to kind of see this. It's not super important that you understand exactly why, oops, what's going on here? Exactly why we do each of these steps, etc. Right? I can't get to the volume because of the stupid Zoom thing. Oh well. So I'm gonna have to minimize. There we go. Okay. I will have to figure out how maybe I can just move the video up. You guys don't understand my Zoom struggles. It makes it so that when you try to click on stuff, there's like all these Zoom menus and it won't let you click. So annoying. Okay, let's see if that fixes so I can actually get to the volume. There we go. Okay, so we don't really need volume on here, but this is the complex test, not the test that we will be doing, right? Notice there's like 17 bottles of things, right? There's a ton to do. They even have a chemical waste bucket here to put compounds that are unsafe, right? This person is wearing gloves because these are acids and they can actually burn you. So they're pretty intense. Basically, you put some droplets in, right? It's a pretty hard to see thing here because it's really small. But there's going to be color changes, right? You're going to have to shake things. There's like 17 steps, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, we finally, oh wait, this is the cool part. So there's this purple color, and you actually add this other solution until it turns clear. And you have to do it one drop at a time. And it'll be like faint purple. And then you have to put one more drop and swirl it and see, because each drop sort of determines the oxygen level. So it's very complicated chemistry stuff here. So once it has disappeared, you would actually take a reading from that micro pipette thing, and it will tell you exactly how much oxygen is in the water. So if that's something that interests you, you can watch that video all the way through, right? Especially if chemistry is something that is interesting to you. More importantly, what affects dissolved oxygen, right? How does it increase or decrease? Well, one thing that we kind of already talked about, thanks to Jack, is the amount of plants or algae, right? Plants and algae will produce oxygen. Bacteria/feces, right? I put feces on there, also known as poop, because really, bacteria comes from feces, a lot of the bacteria in water, right? Not just human, fish, right? And any other organism in the water, any kind of surface runoff that brings animal waste into the water. So there's a lot of ways that bacteria can end up there. Well, bacteria need oxygen, just like you do. So they actually consume oxygen. And if there's a ton of bacteria, they will take all the oxygen for themselves. Oh, faces, yeah. Also the amount of wind. So if it's really windy and the water's moving a lot, that actually increases the amount of oxygen. And the temperature. If it's colder, so colder water equals more DO, and wind, more wind equals more DO. And for bacteria, more bacteria equals less DO. And for plants, more plants equals more DO. Right? So all of them sort of increase together, sort of. Colder water, more DO, more wind, more dissolved oxygen. More bacteria would be less dissolved oxygen, and then more plants would be more. So we can look at all these factors. So if the water sample that we look at is warm, right, we might already be thinking, ooh, this probably has less dissolved oxygen than other water at a colder temperature. Okay. So the last thing here is I wanted to show you another video. This is a sort of sad experiment, right? I'm pretty sure no fish were harmed. But we're going to look at some fish tanks here with different levels of dissolved oxygen. So that tank where all those fish are laying down on the floor, right? You don't usually see fish doing that, has 0 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen. There's no oxygen in that water, right? So those fish actually cannot physically move because there's no oxygen. If they're kept at that low of a DO for that long, they will die, right? So they all go to the bottom and they just lay. They can't do anything because there's no oxygen for them, right? That guy is like, I'm going to try, but, well, he can't, right? So this level really does impact living organisms. If there's too little, they will become lethargic, right? And then eventually they can die. So it is a little sad. I think they show another tank that has more. Let's see. Yeah, I believe this one does. So all those bubbles that you see in the tank, that's oxygen being pumped into the tank, right? If you've ever had a fish tank or seen one, that's really important that you're constantly moving the water to generate oxygen. So look, now all this oxygen is being pumped back in the tank, and what are the fish doing? Well, they're able to move, first of all, right? They're starting to swim around, and they are so excited because they're not going to die, right? They're able to breathe now through their gills, obviously, right? They don't have like lungs. But just changing one thing in the water like that is a huge deal for fish. Okay. In terms of how much dissolved oxygen organisms actually need, right? Because you may be thinking, okay, well, do they need a lot, a little? This unit here is milligrams per liter, which is a little different than the parts per million that we will be using. But regardless, some fish need more oxygen than others, right? For example, worms, which aren't really fish, worms don't really need that much oxygen. The tiniest little amount, they're good to go. Spotfish and blue crabs need just a little bit more. Clams needs more, and then the most oxygen needy fish here is the striped bass, right? This is only a few organisms, of course. You could look this up for any fish. So if you ever do have your own aquarium or tank, right, you would do this for the organisms you have. Well, how much oxygen do they need? How much do I need to have in my tank? So our second factor that we're going to be talking about is phosphates and nitrates. So these occur in fertilizer, and they occur naturally, but in pretty low amounts. Plants use them to grow, and algae as well, but if you give too much, right, like what does a fertilizer do? It makes a plant grow like crazy. Well, in some cases, we don't want plants growing that much, right? Does anybody remember the fancy word that starts with an E that we talked about in the last virtual session? It starts with eutro. I know some of you did the exit ticket already. But eutrophication is something that we talked about last week, right, which is directly related to this. If too many plants grow, they die because there's not enough space for them, and then all the dead organic material gets broken down and lowers the dissolved oxygen, right? So really, phosphates and nitrates are important because they actually lower dissolved oxygen if there's too many of them. And what happens when dissolved oxygen gets lowered? Well, fish die and other organisms die. So plants can grow too fast, lower levels of dissolved oxygen, blah, 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 blah. Nitrate levels, on the other hand, right, can also make humans really sick. So if you drink water that has a ton of nitrate in it, it can make you sick, and it can kill babies, right, because it's basically like a poison. So that's part of why nitrate levels are tested in tap water, right, in water that humans will be drinking, because it can make people really sick and kill babies, which obviously no one wants. How do we test for phosphates and nitrates? We're going to do the same thing. We use a test kit. I will show you in the next virtual session. We're going to do one example of this with tap water, but you just put a tablet and shake water up. It's really, really simple. pH is our next factor. Which, by the way, if you were sitting here thinking, okay, what are we supposed to do in our book for each of these things? Well, you're going to write a little descriptive summary of what that factor is. So again, this PowerPoint is going to be posted, so you can use it to help you with that, right? But right now, you might even be thinking about, what am I going to say to describe pH? What am I going to say to describe dissolved oxygen? Right? So it's supposed to be kind of like an informative book where people can see what the tests are, and then they can see data that you've collected, and then they can see your conclusions. So type a 1 in the chat if you've heard of pH before. You're kind of familiar. You at least know, like, all right, that's a thing. Okay, good. Everybody's heard of it. We only have 3 people here today. This virtual session is really small for some reason. Regardless, right, I'm going to go through it pretty quick because most of us are already familiar. but water should be somewhere between 7 and 8. Seawater is slightly more basic than pure water, right? But if we see high pHs or low pHs, that's going to be really dangerous, right? For example, a low pH would be your stomach acid, and a high pH would be bleach, right? Both of those we would not want our water to be. So how do we measure pH? Well, we use pH strips or tablets. Big surprise. It's the same concept for all of these pretty much. But this is the most commonly assessed test. This is done very frequently. It's very easy to do. It's very cheap. In fact, you can buy pH strips and test pH at home if you want, of whatever you'd want, right? You could test the pH of anything in your house just for fun. So this is a very common test, and it's a good indicator. If the pH is off, that tells us there's something going on with water. Fecal coliform is a fancy kind of bacteria that comes specifically from feces or waste, right? Again, if there's too many bacteria, they're going to lower dissolved oxygen and then stuff will die, right? Stuff meaning plants, animals, everything. This is what the fecal coliform test looks like. It's these little glass vials and they turn colors. It's either red or yellow. Yellow means positive, right? That means, yes, this indeed was filled with fecal coliform. Now, we would expect to see some fecal coliform, especially in big bodies of water like rivers and lakes, right? Because there's organisms there. Of course, they're going to be releasing waste. In tap water or water that humans will be consuming, or even like bath water, right, we wouldn't want to see this. Because everybody knows you might accidentally get some water splashed in your mouth, and you definitely don't want it to be full of poop. So they also test this at the beach, right? When there's a certain level of fecal coliform present, they will actually, they'll close the beach, right? Or they'll put a warning and say, you know, bacteria levels are high. Of course, they always just say bacteria levels are high. They mean there's poop in the water, right? And not to swim. Mm-hmm. So this is something that's pretty frequently tested for as well. Again, we use a tablet. This test is not immediate though, right? This takes 3 days. So let's say that you were like, ooh, I kind of want to drink this water. I wonder if it's safe. Well, if you're testing for fecal coliform, you're going to have to wait 3 days to drink it. Right, so there are immediate ways to test, but they require like complicated laboratory equipment. So for us, it takes 3 days. And like I said, they test beaches and drinking water for this, using a fancy test that's immediate. Okay, so really, in your mind, you should be thinking, okay, cool, but what does this look like in real life? Well, this is what it looks. Oh no, page not found. Probably change the URL. Let me see if I can find this really quick. Latest update could be. No methanol picnic. Well, they used to have all their data posted. Maybe they don't have it posted anymore, which is kind of sad. But basically, you can Google any water source. For example, this is the Columbia River. Let's see, meet Brian, Columbia River, just action. Okay. I might have to post. I'll look for a better data piece, right? But here's an example of talking about beaches and specifically the quality of the water there, right? Check the conditions. Oh, here we go. Download the app. That's why they made it an app instead of putting it on their website. Okay, so we're not going to download the app because this is not an iPhone or Android, but still, you can look this information up, right? And again, they post warnings about this, so even if you didn't look it up, it's not like you would show up and they'd say, you know, oh, it's fine, and you didn't check and you didn't know, right? But you can monitor that stuff if it's interesting. I find it interesting. Plus, you kind of want to know, make sure that people are actually testing your water, right? I would be really scared to find out that they weren't. So the last part of this virtual session, it's pretty short today, is just reiterating about the book. Your book is going to have all of these different pages. It's going to be due in like 2 weeks, but there's no reason that you can't get ahead and start doing this now. You can set up each one of these pages and you literally will want to say dissolved oxygen and then describe what that is. You could put a picture, a video, something else to help explain. Your next page, phosphates and nitrates, what are they, right? pH, what is it? Fecal coliform, what is it? And then data and conclusion you won't be able to do until next week. But then that way you have less stuff to do. The other thing is there is an exit question, which will be available for you in Canvas in 3 minutes. And it's asking you that if you were asked by the government to determine if water was safe, like they're paying you like $1 million, let's say, to determine if water is safe, how would you test the water and what would you look for? Right? Use at least 3 vocabulary words. Well, the vocabulary words that I'm in reference to are these types of factors you can test for, right? So you could use dissolved oxygen, pH, fecal coliform as your vocab words. You could use phosphates, nitrates, dissolved oxygen as your vocab words, right? So you can use any combination of the things that we listed here. You could also look up additional tests if that's something that interests you. What else do they test for, right? Like I said, we'll talk about next week what they don't test for, which is medicines. And that's what we're finding in water now, which is kind of disturbing. So we'll talk about that next week. But you could even say that, test for poisonous chemicals, test for blah, 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 right? Whatever you think is good. It just needs to be a few sentences here using the 3 vocab words. So I'm going to give you guys the code word because with the code word, you will get full credit for this assignment. And those people who are watching the recording will not be able to get full credit. So the code word for today, I just typed into the chat, right? You are just going to paste that in your answer. You don't have to use it in your answer, but you can say code word this, right? And then put your answer. And yeah, I picked that one, Alina, because I thought no one will probably guess that one, right? It doesn't seem like it would be a code word. So in the next minute, you will see this assignment appear on Canvas, and you can do that. You can also start working on your water quality book. If you're not 100% sure on what to do for your water quality book, that's fine, right? We're going to talk about it again next week in the virtual session. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns? Nope. Okay. Well, thank you guys for being here today. That was pretty short, right? Short and sweet. No, the code word's not going to be worth points this time. It is in terms of you're going to get 100% on this assignment and other people won't. But it's not going to be bonus points. Next week, I will offer a code word for bonus points. So you can keep racking them up. All right. Otherwise, I will say bye to you guys, and I will see you next week at 1.